Act as if God has already said yes. Live from the fulfilled promise. Stop living like you're waiting on an answer when heaven already responded. The moment the desire entered your heart, the yes was released. God does not hesitate, reconsider, or delay. He completes. The only delay that exists is the space between belief and embodiment. Most people pray and then return to fear, return to doubt, return to rehearsing what could go wrong. But faith is not what you say when you ask. Faith is how you live after you ask. Acting as if God has already said yes means you stop preparing for disappointment and start aligning with fulfillment. It means your tone changes, your posture changes, your expectations change, not because you see proof, but because you trust the promise more than appearances. When God says yes, the outcome is already sealed, even if the evidence hasn't caught up yet. And this is where most people lose power. They keep visiting the problem instead of moving into the promise. They keep asking the same question, replaying the same worry, checking the same limitation. But you cannot live in the prayer and the promise at the same time. Once you've prayed, your job is not to worry, chase, or force. It's to live like the answer is inevitable. That means you walk with calm instead of urgency, confidence instead of desperation, peace instead of pressure. The promise responds to certainty, not anxiety. Acting as if God has already said yes also means gratitude becomes your default state. You don't wait for the manifestation to say thank you. You say thank you because you know it's done. Gratitude before evidence is the highest form of faith. It collapses time. It tells life, I'm already living from the outcome. Complaining delays alignment, but gratitude accelerates it. When you give thanks in advance, you step emotionally into the fulfilled promise, and reality begins adjusting to match your inner conviction. Living from the fulfilled promise means your decisions are no longer fear-based. You stop asking, what if it doesn't work? And start asking, how do I steward what's already mine? You stop shrinking to fit old versions of yourself. You stop explaining your faith to people who only understand proof. You don't rush because you trust timing. You don't panic because you know the ending. You don't chase because you expect alignment. This is the quiet authority of someone who knows God already said yes. When you act as if God has already said yes, resistance loses its power. Doubt becomes background noise. Delays stop discouraging you. You no longer need signs because your belief has become the sign. You don't try to convince life, you allow it to unfold. And in that allowing, doors open, connections align, opportunities appear, and the promise begins to materialize naturally, not because you forced it, but because you finally lived like it was already yours. So stop waiting, stop rehearsing lack, stop standing outside the promise, step into it, live from it, walk as if the yes has already been spoken, because it has. The yes is already spoken, you're just catching up. Stop living like heaven is undecided about you. Stop behaving as if God is still thinking, still weighing options, still waiting for you to become worthy enough. The truth most people never fully accept is this: when the desire was planted in your heart, the answer was already released. God does not work on a human timeline. He does not answer prayers the way people reply to emails. Divine decisions are instant, complete, and final. What feels like waiting is not God delaying. It is you catching up internally to what has already been settled spiritually. The moment you understand this, your entire posture toward life begins to change. Most people spend their lives stuck in a dangerous middle space. They pray with faith, but they live with fear. They ask boldly, but they act cautiously. They say they trust God, yet they keep preparing for disappointment. This contradiction is where manifestation slows down. Acting as if God has already said yes means you stop rehearsing failure in your mind and stop talking as if the answer is uncertain. Faith is not proven by how intensely you pray. It is proven by how confidently you live afterward. The real test begins when the prayer ends. When God says yes, the outcome already exists. It may not yet be visible, but it is already real. Think about this: nothing can be promised unless it already exists in some form. God does not promise possibilities, He promises outcomes. So when you keep asking, when will it happen, what you're really saying is, I don't yet believe it's done. And belief is the bridge between the unseen promise and the seen reality. The moment you believe the yes is already spoken, your energy shifts from waiting to expecting. Expectation is powerful. It shapes how you move, how you speak, how you decide. Someone who is waiting walks carefully, hesitantly, always ready to retreat. But someone who expects walks differently. They move with calm certainty. They plan without panic. They rest without guilt. Acting as if God has already said yes means you stop bracing yourself for bad news and start preparing yourself for fulfillment. You don't obsess over obstacles because you trust the destination more than the detours. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to act from the fulfilled promise is because they are addicted to evidence. They want proof before peace. They want signs before certainty. But faith does not work that way. Faith requires you to emotionally arrive at the outcome before physical reality reflects it. This is why so many people feel stuck. They are waiting for the outer world to change before they allow the inner world to relax. Acting as if God has already said yes reverses this order. You relax first, you trust first, you align first, then reality follows. Living as if the yes is already spoken also means you stop revisiting the same doubts every day. You stop waking up and checking whether the promise is still valid. You stop reopening prayers that were already answered. Many people unknowingly cancel their own breakthroughs by constantly questioning what they already asked for. Every time you return to worry, you are mentally saying, maybe God didn't mean it. But divine promises do not expire, and they do not need to be reapproved daily. Your job is not to keep asking. Your job is to keep believing. When you truly accept that the yes is already spoken, gratitude becomes natural. You no longer force yourself to be thankful. You genuinely feel it, not because everything looks perfect, but because you know where it's going. Gratitude is not denial of current challenges. It is confidence in the final outcome. It says, I know how this ends. And when you know how something ends, you stop reacting emotionally to every temporary fluctuation along the way. Acting as if God has already said yes also changes how you handle delays. Delays no longer feel like rejection. They feel like alignment. You stop interpreting silence as denial. You stop seeing obstacles as signs to quit. Instead, you understand that everything is rearranging to match what has already been decided. When you live from this awareness, patience becomes easier because you are no longer waiting in uncertainty. You are waiting in certainty. Another powerful shift happens when you stop asking people to validate what God has already approved. When you believe the yes is spoken, you stop explaining yourself. You stop shrinking your vision to make others comfortable. You stop seeking permission to dream bigger. You move quietly, confidently, knowing that what is meant for you does not require consensus. Acting from the fulfilled promise gives you an inner authority that does not depend on applause or agreement. This mindset also frees you from desperation. Desperation comes from believing something might not happen, but when you know the yes is already spoken, you don't chase, force, or manipulate outcomes. You allow, you align, you prepare. You don't beg doors to open. You expect them to. And when something doesn't work out, you don't fall apart because you trust that nothing can block what God has already approved. Living as if God has already said yes does not mean you do nothing. It means you act from peace instead of panic. You take inspired action, not fearful action. You move when it feels aligned, not when it feels rushed. You stop hustling to prove your worth and start stewarding what's already yours. This is a higher way of living, one where effort is guided by trust, not driven by fear. At some point, you must make a decision. Will you keep living like the answer is pending, or will you live like the promise is fulfilled? You cannot do both. One keeps you anxious, the other keeps you aligned. One keeps you reactive, the other keeps you grounded. Acting as if God has already said yes is not pretending. It is agreeing with divine truth before the world confirms it. So today, stop waiting emotionally. Stop postponing your peace. Stop acting like the outcome is uncertain. The yes was spoken the moment the desire was planted. Your only work now is to live in agreement with that yes, walk like it's done. Speak like it's settled, decide like it's inevitable. Because when you live from the fulfilled promise, reality has no choice but to follow. Faith is a posture, not a prayer. Faith is often misunderstood as something that only happens in moments of prayer, when hands are folded, eyes are closed, and words are spoken with intensity. But real faith does not end when the prayer ends. In fact, that is where faith truly begins. Prayer is the request, posture is the response. Many people pray with passion and then rise from prayer and immediately return to fear, worry, and overthinking. They speak to God with confidence and then speak to themselves with doubt. This contradiction weakens alignment. Acting as if God has already said yes requires a shift, not in how you pray, but in how you stand after you pray. Posture is how you carry yourself in life. It is the emotional and mental position you take in everyday moments. Someone who believes the answer is already given does not move the same way as someone who thinks the outcome is uncertain. Faith is revealed in your reactions, your expectations, and your decisions. It shows in how you respond to delays, how you speak about the future, and how you treat challenges. Faith is not proven in private prayers alone. It is proven in public behavior. Many people unknowingly cancel their prayers with their posture. They pray for peace and then live in panic. They pray for abundance and then act from scarcity. They pray for clarity and then keep revisiting confusion. This is not because they are weak. It is because they have been taught that faith is a moment instead of a mindset. Acting as if God has already said yes means your posture changes. You stop hovering over the problem. You stop bracing for disappointment. You stop expecting things to fall apart. Your body, mind, and emotions begin to align with trust instead of tension. When faith becomes posture, rest replaces anxiety. Rest is not laziness, it is confidence. It is the calm that comes from knowing you are not responsible for forcing outcomes. People who lack faith feel like everything depends on them. People who trust God understand that alignment matters more than effort. Acting from the fulfilled promise allows you to release the illusion of control and step into cooperation with divine timing. You still act, but your actions come from peace, not pressure. Your posture also determines what you notice. When you are anxious, you look for threats. When you are faithful, you notice confirmations. Acting as if God has already said yes trains your mind to recognize alignment instead of resistance. You begin to see doors instead of walls, opportunities instead of obstacles, lessons instead of setbacks. Nothing external may change immediately, but everything internal does, and that internal shift changes how life responds to you. Faith as posture also means consistency. It is easy to feel faithful on good days. The real test comes on quiet days, delayed days, and uncertain days. Acting as if God has already said yes means you do not emotionally collapse every time something takes longer than expected. You remain steady because your confidence is not rooted in circumstances but in promise. You understand that delay is not denial, and silence is not rejection. Your posture stays upright even when answers seem quiet. Another powerful aspect of faith as posture is how it affects your speech. People who believe the outcome is settled speak differently. They do not constantly say, "I hope," "maybe," or "if it works out." They speak with grounded expectation. Not arrogance, not forcing, just quiet certainty. Words carry posture. The way you talk about your life reveals whether you are waiting for permission or living from assurance. Acting as if God has already said yes means your language begins to reflect trust instead of uncertainty. Posture also shapes boundaries. When you believe the promise is already fulfilled, you stop tolerating environments, conversations, and behaviors that pull you back into doubt. You protect your peace because peace is evidence of faith. You become selective about what you listen to, who you share your vision with, and how much access you give to negativity. This is not isolation, it is alignment. You understand that faith must be protected to be sustained. One of the greatest transformations that happens when faith becomes posture is how you handle effort. You stop overworking out of fear. You stop pushing from desperation. You start moving with intuition. Acting from the fulfilled promise allows effort to feel lighter because it is guided by trust. You no longer feel the need to chase every opportunity or fix every problem. You trust that what is meant for you will meet you at the right time. Faith as posture also brings emotional maturity. You stop reacting to every opinion. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop measuring progress by speed alone. When you know the outcome is secure, you become patient with the process. You stop comparing your journey to others. You understand that posture keeps you aligned even when progress feels slow. You don't rush what is already guaranteed. Living this way does not mean life becomes perfect. Challenges still arise, uncertainty still appears, but your posture remains grounded. You face difficulty without panic. You face uncertainty without collapse. You face silence without fear. Acting as if God has already said yes gives you emotional stability in a world that constantly shifts. At some point, faith must move from something you practice occasionally to something you embody daily. You cannot live one way and expect a different result. Faith that changes outcomes is faith that changes posture. It is visible, consistent, and calm. It does not shout, it stands. So ask yourself honestly, after you pray, how do you live? Do you rise from prayer and return to worry, or do you rise and rest? Do you speak fear, or do you speak trust? Do you act rushed, or do you move with peace? The prayer has already been spoken. Now your posture must agree with it. Because when faith becomes posture, life has no choice but to align with the promise you are already standing in. Stop visiting the problem, move into the promise. One of the greatest mistakes people make after praying is that they keep returning to the very problem they asked God to handle. They pray for freedom, then mentally revisit fear. They pray for provision, then emotionally live in lack. They pray for direction, then obsess over confusion. This habit is subtle, but it is powerful, and it is the reason many promises feel delayed. Acting as if God has already said yes requires a clear decision. You cannot live in the problem and the promise at the same time. You must choose where you reside mentally and emotionally. Most people think of problems as situations, but problems are actually places the mind keeps visiting. Every time you replay the worry, rehearse the fear, or analyze the lack, you are mentally returning to a location you were meant to leave behind. Prayer is not just asking for change, it is an invitation to relocate internally. When God says yes, He is calling you out of the problem space and into the promise space. But many people pray and then immediately move back into familiar mental territory, even if that territory no longer serves them. Moving into the promise begins with awareness. You must notice how often you revisit the problem. How often do you start your day thinking about what's wrong instead of what's unfolding? How often do you measure your life by what hasn't happened yet instead of what is aligning? Acting as if God has already said yes means you stop waking up to worry and start waking up to expectation. Not forced positivity, but grounded confidence. The promise is not fragile. It does not disappear because you stop worrying about it. One reason people keep visiting the problem is because it feels familiar. Struggle becomes an identity. Worry becomes routine. Fear becomes normal. Even when the promise is given, the mind wants to return to what it knows. But comfort zones can be prisons. Acting from the fulfilled promise requires courage, not to fight the problem, but to release it. You don't have to solve everything to move forward. You just have to stop living there emotionally. When you move into the promise, your questions change. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How is this preparing me?" You stop asking, "What if it fails?" and start asking, "What is this aligning me for?" The promise does not remove challenges, it repositions them. Problems become temporary steps instead of permanent walls. Acting as if God has already said yes means you interpret difficulty differently, not as resistance, but as refinement. Another powerful shift occurs in how you use your energy. Visiting the problem drains you, living in the promise restores you. Worry is exhausting because it requires constant mental effort. Faith, when practiced properly, is restful. It does not mean inaction, it means right action. When you stop revisiting the problem, you free mental space for creativity, clarity, and intuition. This is where inspired solutions appear, not when you obsess, but when you allow. Moving into the promise also means letting go of old narratives. Many people keep retelling the same story of struggle, even after they've prayed for change. They remind themselves and others of what went wrong, what they lack, and what hurt them. These stories keep you anchored to the problem. Acting as if God has already said yes requires you to update your inner story. You are no longer someone trying to change. You are someone transitioning into fulfillment. Your past does not need constant explanation when your future is already secured. One of the hardest aspects of moving into the promise is silence. Silence after prayer can feel uncomfortable because there is no immediate feedback. This is when many people panic and return to worry. But silence is not absence, it is trust, building space. Acting as if God has already said yes means you do not fill silence with fear. You allow it to deepen your faith. You resist the urge to micromanage what is already in motion. Living from the promise also changes how you make decisions. When you live in the problem, decisions are reactive and fear-based. When you live in the promise, decisions are intentional and aligned. You stop choosing from survival and start choosing from vision. You stop asking, what's the safest option, and start asking, what aligns with who I'm becoming. Acting as if God has already said yes gives you permission to think long-term instead of short-term. Another key shift is emotional discipline. Moving into the promise does not mean you never feel doubt or fear, it means you do not live there. Emotions are visitors, not residences. Acting as if God has already said yes means when doubt appears, you acknowledge it but do not build a home in it. You gently return your focus to trust. You practice faith not by suppressing fear, but by refusing to dwell in it. When you stop visiting the problem, your reactions change. You stop overreacting to small setbacks. You stop interpreting every delay as failure. You stop letting other people's opinions shake your confidence. Living from the promise gives you emotional stability. You are no longer tossed by every wave because you are anchored in certainty. Moving into the promise also affects how you treat yourself. You stop being harsh, impatient, and critical. You understand that growth takes time and alignment unfolds gradually. Acting as if God has already said yes means you allow yourself to grow without pressure. You give yourself grace because you trust the process. At some point, you must decide that the problem no longer deserves daily attention. You have already prayed. The answer has already been given. Continuing to live in the problem is not responsibility, it is resistance. Moving into the promise is not denial, it is alignment. You are not ignoring reality, you are choosing a higher one. So today, make a decision. Stop revisiting what you've already surrendered. Stop living in the questions. Stop waking up in the problem. Step into the promise mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Let your thoughts, words, and actions reflect where you are going, not where you've been. Because the moment you stop visiting the problem, you give the promise space to fully arrive. Gratitude is proof you believe it's done. Gratitude is often taught as something you practice after things go well, after prayers are answered, after circumstances improve. But true gratitude, the kind that transforms lives, comes before the evidence appears. It is not a reaction to results, it is a declaration of trust. Acting as if God has already said yes means gratitude becomes your natural response, not because everything looks perfect, but because you believe the promise is already fulfilled. Gratitude is the emotional signature of faith that knows the outcome. Most people wait for visible change before they allow themselves to feel thankful. They believe gratitude must be earned by proof, but this mindset keeps them emotionally locked in waiting. When you thank God in advance, you move yourself out of anticipation and into completion. Gratitude collapses time. It places you emotionally at the finish line, even while you are still walking the path. And when your emotions arrive at the outcome, reality begins adjusting to match your inner state. Gratitude is powerful because it signals certainty. You do not thank someone for something you believe might not happen. You thank them for something you know is done. Acting as if God has already said yes means your gratitude is not forced positivity or blind optimism. It is calm confidence. It is the quiet acknowledgement that what was promised cannot be undone by delays, obstacles, or appearances. Gratitude says, I trust the process because I trust the promise. One of the greatest blocks to manifestation is emotional resistance created by complaining. Complaining keeps your attention fixed on what is missing. It trains the mind to scan for lack, reinforcing the feeling that something is wrong. Gratitude does the opposite. It shifts focus from absence to assurance. When you practice gratitude before evidence, you stop emotionally arguing with reality. You stop reminding yourself of what hasn't happened yet. Instead, you remind yourself of what is already guaranteed. Gratitude also changes how you experience waiting. Waiting without gratitude feels heavy and stressful. Waiting with gratitude feels peaceful and purposeful. Acting as if God has already said yes means you no longer experience waiting as punishment or delay, but as preparation. You understand that time is being used to align everything perfectly, not to test your worthiness. Gratitude allows you to remain emotionally settled even when outcomes are still forming. Another powerful aspect of gratitude is that it neutralizes fear. Fear feeds on uncertainty. Gratitude dissolves uncertainty by reinforcing trust. When you give thanks in advance, you are telling your mind that there is nothing to fear because the ending is secure. This calms the nervous system, reduces overthinking, and creates space for clarity. Acting from gratitude is not just spiritual, it is deeply stabilizing. Gratitude also sharpens awareness. When you are grateful, you begin noticing small confirmations, subtle alignments, and quiet progress that you might otherwise overlook. Acting as if God has already said yes tunes your perception to evidence of movement rather than evidence of lack. You start seeing how things are unfolding instead of obsessing over how far you still have to go. This awareness strengthens faith, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of trust and recognition. Living in gratitude also transforms your language. Instead of saying, I'm still waiting, you say it's unfolding. Instead of nothing is happening, you say everything is aligning. These are not empty affirmations. They are reflections of inner belief. Words carry emotional weight. When your language aligns with gratitude, your posture aligns with trust. Acting as if God has already said yes naturally changes how you speak about your life. Gratitude before evidence also deepens humility. It acknowledges that you are not the source of the outcome. You are the recipient of grace. This removes pressure. You stop feeling like you must control every detail. You stop blaming yourself for delays. Gratitude reminds you that you are supported, guided, and held by something greater than your effort alone. This humility creates emotional freedom. Another shift that gratitude brings is patience. When you are grateful, you are not in a hurry to escape the present moment. You trust that each stage has purpose. Acting as if God has already said yes allows you to be present without frustration. You stop racing toward the future because you know it is coming. This patience is not passive, it is grounded. It keeps you steady when things move slowly. Gratitude also influences how you handle challenges. Difficult moments no longer feel like signs of failure. You see them as part of the alignment process. Acting as if God has already said yes means you do not question the promise every time something feels hard. You understand that growth often includes discomfort, and gratitude helps you remain centered during it. You face challenges with trust instead of resentment. One of the most overlooked benefits of gratitude is how it affects self-worth. worth. When you are grateful, you stop feeling undeserving. You stop questioning whether you are allowed to receive good things. Gratitude affirms that the promise was given intentionally. Acting as if God has already said yes means you accept the blessing without guilt or hesitation. You no longer shrink yourself to match old limitations. Living in gratitude does not mean ignoring reality. It means interpreting reality through faith instead of fear. You can acknowledge what is incomplete without losing confidence in what is coming. Gratitude allows you to hold both truth and trust at the same time. This balance is powerful because it keeps you grounded while remaining hopeful. At some point, gratitude becomes a way of life rather than a practice. You wake up thankful, not because everything is perfect, but because you know the promise stands. You move through your day with appreciation, not because every moment is easy, but because every moment is part of something meaningful. Acting as if God has already said yes transforms gratitude from a tool into a state of being. So begin thanking God before the breakthrough, before the answer, before the evidence. Let gratitude be your proof of belief. Let it calm your mind, soften your heart, and steady your steps. Because when you live in gratitude, you live from completion. And when you live from completion, reality has no choice but to reflect what you already believe is done. Live like the outcome is inevitable. Too many people approach life as though the future is uncertain, as though the answers they seek might never arrive, and as though the promises they prayed for might slip through their fingers. But acting as if God has already said yes changes everything. Living like the outcome is inevitable means shifting from hope to certainty, from chasing to allowing, and from questioning to embodying. It means walking through life with quiet authority, knowing that the ending is already written, even if the path to it is still unfolding. This mindset is not wishful thinking. It is alignment with divine timing and fulfillment. The first shift required is mental. Most people live in two conflicting realities simultaneously. They pray for an outcome while expecting it not to happen. This mental conflict creates tension, slows manifestation, and breeds doubt. Living as if the outcome is inevitable requires fully accepting that the promise is already yours. You no longer brace for disappointment. You no longer hedge your faith with what-ifs. You step into certainty, trusting that divine timing is perfect and that nothing can prevent what has already been decreed. Living from inevitability also changes the way you move. A person who believes the outcome is certain does not hustle frantically, nor do they overcompensate to force results. Their energy is calm, deliberate, and aligned. They take inspired action instead of reactive action. They do not try to convince life to conform to their wishes because they understand that the universe is already cooperating. Acting as if God has already said yes means your steps are guided by inner assurance rather than external pressure. Another key aspect of this mindset is emotional stability. When you live like the outcome is inevitable, you are not tossed by every obstacle, delay, or challenge. You do not interpret temporary setbacks as permanent failures. Instead, you see them as part of the journey, as small adjustments along a predetermined path. Acting as if the outcome is inevitable gives you confidence that no circumstance can derail what is already destined. It frees you from fear, worry, and anxious overthinking, allowing your energy to remain steady and focused. This mindset also transforms how you perceive time. Most people live as though fulfillment is far away, as though they must endure endless waiting. But when you live from inevitability, time feels different. You understand that the promise is not distant. It is already in motion. The steps you take are not desperate attempts to speed it up. They are aligned movements that harmonize with divine orchestration. This creates patience and composure, turning waiting into preparation rather than frustration. Living like the outcome is inevitable also changes how you respond to others. People who live from doubt often seek validation, approval, or reassurance. They over-explain, over-apologize, and over-justify. Someone who embodies inevitability speaks less, acts confidently, and trusts without needing constant confirmation. They do not allow negativity, skepticism, or resistance from others to shake their conviction. Acting as if God has already said yes strengthens boundaries because faith becomes the anchor that protects your vision from being influenced by fear. Gratitude becomes natural when you live in this state. You do not wait for proof or external confirmation to feel thankful. You are grateful because you know the promise is fulfilled, even if the material evidence has not yet manifested. Gratitude before the manifestation is an emotional statement of certainty, and it accelerates alignment because it signals to your mind, body, and spirit that you are already living from completion. Living like the outcome is inevitable and being grateful simultaneously strengthens faith in a self-reinforcing cycle. Another transformational aspect is decision making. When outcomes feel uncertain, choices are often reactive, cautious, or fear-driven. But when you act as if the promise is inevitable, your decisions become intentional, bold, and aligned with the future you are already living into. You no longer shrink yourself to avoid failure. You no longer defer opportunities for approval. You make moves from a place of empowerment, not desperation. Each decision reinforces the certainty that the outcome is unfolding exactly as it should. Living from inevitability also strengthens your resilience. Challenges and obstacles are inevitable in any journey, but when you embody certainty, they are no longer threatening. You meet adversity with calm and clarity. You do not lose faith because difficulties are temporary. They are the natural shaping forces of growth. Acting as if God has already said yes allows you to remain centered, confident, and unshaken, even when life tests your patience or resolve. The energy you carry also changes dramatically. People who are unsure of outcomes radiate tension, worry, and indecision. But those who live from inevitability radiate confidence, composure, and alignment. Others sense this energy immediately. They are drawn to it, influenced by it, and reassured by it. Living like the outcome is inevitable is not just an internal shift, it is a visible presence that affects how the world responds to you. Another benefit of this mindset is the freedom it provides. When you trust that the outcome is already determined, you no longer feel trapped by circumstance. You stop forcing results. You stop overthinking every detail. You allow life to unfold with less strain because you understand that what is meant for you cannot be prevented or stolen. Acting as if God has already said yes liberates you from unnecessary stress and gives you the peace to focus on what truly matters. Living like the outcome is inevitable also influences your inner dialogue. Instead of saying, "I hope this works out," you affirm, "It is already done." Instead of asking, "Will I succeed?" you declare, "I am already succeeding." Language is powerful because it shapes perception. By consistently speaking as though the outcome is guaranteed, you train your mind to align with certainty and trust, reinforcing the reality you are already living into. This mindset also encourages strategic patience. You understand that divine timing may require certain steps, experiences, or growth before the full manifestation appears. You do not rush or push against the natural flow. Instead, you trust the process, remaining aligned while allowing the universe to orchestrate the right conditions. Acting as if God has already said yes turns waiting into a dynamic state of readiness, not frustration. Finally, living like the outcome is inevitable means embodying faith in every aspect of life. Your thoughts, words, and actions all reflect the certainty of the promise. You do not need constant external validation because your inner assurance is enough. You move through life with the calm of someone who knows the ending, regardless of temporary appearances. This embodiment of faith transforms not just your outcomes, but your character, your energy, and your experience of reality itself. So, begin today by making the conscious choice to live like the outcome is inevitable. Walk with confidence, speak with certainty, make decisions with clarity, rest in gratitude, face challenges with calm, align your actions with faith, not fear, release the need for constant proof, and trust that what God has promised cannot fail. Because when you live as if the outcome is inevitable, your life begins to unfold from fulfillment, and reality cannot help but reflect the certainty you already carry within you.